Over the last quarter of 2014, there was great speculation that I was going to enter a new period of time. Now, a period of time is not the same as a season. It is a section of a season during which a time of crisis is going on. Usually the resolution of such a crisis ends that season and brings on a new season. Now, as it was, the third great questioning that was rumoured and at one stage looked imminent never happened in 2015. However, what I want to talk about now was the very first time such an event happened. I'm going to do this basically over two blogs. The first blog, I'm going to talk about the trigger of what I call the first great questioning. The second week, I'm going to do about the second great questioning and how it was resolved. So my diary doesn't go back very far before the Great Questioning. It starts on the 17th of February 1996, and the Great Questioning, the first Great Questioning, began at the start of October 1997, so only about a year and a half before that, but after that. The first Great Questioning was a crisis of faith, okay? It was something that made me question what I had been brought up. Now, I'd been brought up as a Christian, and whilst I had said, yes, you know, I understand what I've been brought up in, during the first testimony which I talked to you about before in this series, I was not yet living on my own faith, but still living, I suppose, as I was being told, on my parents' faith. Now, at the end of September 1997, an event took place that shook what I knew and what I had taken as read and made me analyse things, and that was the first death I encountered of another member of my family. My grandfather, on my maternal side, died of secondary cancer during the September of 1997. He had colon cancer in 1993, the same year that I had appendicitis, and he'd had to have his colon removed. And several years later, at the start of 1997, the cancer had obviously got into the blood and it came back, secondary cancer on his back. Of course, by that time it's in the blood, it's too late, and it's only a matter of time. And it was later that year in the September that he developed a tumour in his brain, and that killed him eventually. Do you know, whilst he was alive, I won't say that I was hugely close to him, any closer than perhaps I was to any of the other members of my family. However, I did sort of see him as rather a sort of role model. My granddad was, he was extremely funny, but he was also, I don't know if you've ever watched Star Trek, but he was very much like a Vulcan. He was very, very logical. He was extremely good at maths, extremely good at sciences, all of them. I think he took combined sciences at Cambridge University and came out with very, very good grades. He also knew quite a bit about sort of engineering and mechanics and that sort of thing. He had smoked before, which is probably what caused this eventually. But the way he got around that, the way he gave up that, when his daughter, my mother, started having children, so when I was born basically, was that he used to eat polos, constantly eat polos. He used to constantly whistle and eat polos, and that his car used to smell of polos. Everything used to smell that minty smell, and it was fantastic. He never used to go anywhere without a packet of polos. Now, when I was younger, my grandfather did a lot of the ferrying, the taxiing around. He used to pick us up from secondary school, sort of in that middle bit after we used to catch the bus home, but before we used to walk down the hill and sort of catch public buses ourselves. And when we used to have after-school activities that went on later, he would used to come and pick us up and take us home and stay with us, because of course by that point I was in secondary school, my sisters were in junior school, just moving into secondary school, and both of my parents were working again by then and not necessarily home exactly when we were. I remember things about my grandfather. He used to leave his favourite bit of any main meal to the last mouthful. And he used to make a big thing about leaving stuff to the end. We used to say, "Do you not want it?" And he'd be like, No, I'm saving it because I like to have it as my last mouthful." The other thing that I remember, and as a little cameo, my grandfather and I used to go out walking quite a little bit. We used to like to go walking round Hartsome Park, which is where I used to be taken by my parents when I was little. And one Sunday we decided that we were going to walk round a different place, Wisby Nature Trail, which is not far outside Lincoln. So we sort of walked round, and obviously we had miscalculated the weather, we'd miscalculated how much juice to drink, and I got heat stroke and I was incredibly dehydrated. And on our way back we sat down on this little tiny bench facing this huge hedge which had a tiny bit of shade, and we were sort of sat there for a little bit because I just needed to sit down one more time before we got to the car and got home. And we sat for a while and we were silent, and then my grandfather said, "Well, we better not stay here too long in case we catch our death of cold," because obviously that was his sense of humour, that was what he was like. He never went into hospital, he died at home, and he went downhill very quickly. On the Monday he was fine, and then on the Tuesday he couldn't get out of bed. I went to see him, I believe, the Wednesday before he died, and by that point he was beginning to lose his vision, and they knew what was wrong with him. They knew it was inoperable, untreatable, that he was going to die from this. And, we were pretty much told that, although it didn't register at that time. He used to have to be fed sort of with a bottle, with a baby's feeding bottle, because he couldn't hold cups, terribly, terribly sad. Now on the Saturday, it was our custom to eat tea at about 6 o'clock, watching the TV. My father was making the meal, and at that point he used to like to make scone-based pizza, handmade completely from scratch on a Saturday, with vegetables that were frozen, and we used to have them on little plastic plates. He was making that. My mother and my sisters were watching the television ready, and I was on the computer. It was the Acorn at that time, of course, and I was playing around with a program known as Flare, which I think was a precursor to things like Coral Draw, and you could make sort of jazzy pictures and stuff on it. And I remember that there was a phone call that my father took from the kitchen, and as he was speaking, the computer sort of seized up, and I don't know if that's sort of like a premonition or a worry or what, but that caused me to sort of break out of my own little world that I was in, go downstairs and see what was going on. And the phone call was to say that my grandfather had actually died. He died at home, and a little while later, about a week later, we had his funeral. And my nan, who I was very close with, I went to help her. I don't remember much about the funeral or the crematorium service because my focus was completely on my nan. You know, I would travel with her in the main car. I would walk directly behind the coffin with her. And anyway, it happened. We had the funeral service in our local St George's Church with his pastor, I think, from Skellingthorpe. We went to the crematorium in Lincoln, and we had the crematorium service, so he was cremated after that. And then a little while later, we were given the urn, and I can't remember if he was scattered or buried. I think he was buried under one of the sort of little fruit trees round there. But I can't remember. He was either buried or scattered around there. And that was the last of it. Really, it wasn't a place that we went to visit very often. Although we'd mark obviously things like his birthday in February, his year's mind in September, and of course his wedding anniversary to my nan, who was still alive. She would go on to have a sort of questioning of her own when she got cancer the following year. Thankfully, that was removed, treated, and she's lived for decades since. But that must have been a big shock to her. For me, and the thing that started the first great questioning was, at that point I was a Christian, and I always believed that when somebody died, if they were Christian, they went to heaven, that I'd see them again. And I suddenly felt very alone and thought, actually, I don't feel like I will ever see him again. I don't feel like he's still with me, blah, blah, blah. And what really got me thinking was, well, how can we be certain that there is an afterlife? How can we be certain of anything? And that, being saved and the afterlife, is absolutely crucial to Christianity. And so the first questioning began with me basically throwing off that and saying, actually, I feel completely alone. I feel like he is gone, and I shall never ever see him again. Even if I die, even after that, it will never happen. So, whilst my chest infection continues and I continue on my second batch of antibiotics, I'm feeling much better, even though I sound like absolute shit. Let me wish the 3 people on this week's list who are having birthdays a very happy birthday. They are Catherine Cunningham, Lee Remedios, and Ryan McGiven. I hope they all have splendid birthdays that help start off 2015 absolutely fantastically for them.